I think the first thing is to talk a little bit about how this project started. And 6 years ago, I had this party that I started at our local art establishment called the Great River Arts in Little Falls, and it's called the Salon. And for those of you who are looking for something to do next Saturday night, there are cards over there, and Salon 14 will be happening. Well, at the end of the evening, this elderly gentleman by the name of Gordon Gerling, who was a state legislator many, many years ago, and as it turns out, had been sort of following my career around, had approached me and said, I'd like to talk to you about an idea I have. And he told me about the State Veteran Cemetery, and I had at that point not been out there because of just travel, and I didn't actually at that point know anyone who had been buried there. So we had a nice visit, and about a week later I gave him a call, and he set up for me to go out and meet David and a few other people, and talked about the idea that he had. And originally he wanted to have maybe a large fresco done out there. Well, fresco is painting into fresh pigment with water-based colors, and I've done a lot of that work over the last 35 years, but this would not really be appropriate in the building. So we talked about, let's do 5 oil paintings. There are 5 walls, there are 5 branches of the service. There's a beautiful, window from floor to ceiling, so to speak, on the east side, so you have a lot of beautiful natural light in the building. Well, the one thing we had to get was permission from the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, who was Clark Dyrud at the time. And once that was secured, he said, great, you guys can do it, but no tax dollars, you're gonna have to go out and find the money yourself. So with that said, we all left for the winter, and a committee was formed in the late spring of 2009. And we figured, okay, we'll get different fundraisers together, start to put a program and come up with a plan. Well, by September 15th, the little Minnesota State Veterans Memorial Association is a small group that were very instrumental in getting this cemetery together back in the early 90s. And right now it's a group of elderly gentlemen that are all in their late 80s, early 90s, and so when we have our meetings, we're kind of the kids in the group, so to speak. But Gordon had this dream, and so when we talked about doing the 5 branches, I said, okay, let's get the contract signed. And they put up the first $12,500 to have me then spend the next 3.5 months doing these particular drawings. So as you look around, these charcoal drawings, like here's the Army, and then back over there you have the Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Those were all put together that fall. And so what I had to do was buy a whole new library, military library. I don't use computers, I'm an old dinosaur, so I do all my research and had a lectern built so I could page through things and sit down. So everything that was put together in these initial drawings were done from old photos, sketches, and paintings. Then we had our first formal presentation in December of 2009 at the Initiative Foundation, and that was kind of the kickoff. So the first painting then became the Army. I thought, well, since we have Camp Ripley right there, the National Guard, the Army history, Fort Snelling going back to 1820, that's what I would begin with. Now, I want you to pay particular attention to these 3 different pieces. There's the initial sketch. This is the color study. You can see how things are kind of getting revised. This is the giclée, the final painting. All these changes happen because everyone on these canvases, like on the Army and Navy, are people that have come to my studio, or I've gone to Fort Snelling and worked with them personally. So these are actual people. So they become very much a part of the project itself, all of the study, all of the history. And what that does is it allows us to pay homage to not only the men and women who have served, who are serving in the military, and those who will serve. So it's the past, present, and the future. And in addition to honoring these men and women and their families, we also are using this as a large educational tool. So we've already spoken with the superintendent of Little Falls how we can make this part of the curriculum. We are documenting the project. As a matter of fact, if you go onto my website, you will find Common Ground, which is Lakeland Public Television's small program featuring different things in the north, central Minnesota and northern Minnesota. They generally do like 3 stories per episode. Well, when they came down and saw the depth of the project, they said, we're going to give you a full episode. Well, after the 3rd trip, they said, we're giving you 2 full episodes. So you can go onto the site, vetsart.org, or my site, which is www.bonefresco.com. I can write it all down for you. And you can watch sort of the start to finish. You can see how this process goes on. You can see working with the models in the uniforms and the costumes. There's actually a book over there that'll give you a lot of the shots of the different portraits and the step-by-step process that goes into painting something like this. When we got started with it, one of the big things was, as I mentioned earlier, was the fundraising. So the first people and groups that we really wanted to talk to were the veterans and the different veterans organizations, because they were the people that approached me to do this. So we felt they would be the first people to come on board. So as a result, we started doing presentations at like local level, which would be 6th District American Legion, VFW, and some of the other clubs. And then we started to get invited, David and I, to the state conventions. So we started going to Rochester, St. Paul, and other places. And one thing led to another, where the 2010-11 Minnesota State VFW commander took this project on as his statewide fundraising project. So he traveled around to what then were 254 different VFW posts to raise money for the project. And then from there was a gentleman from St. Cloud who was very enthusiastic about it, and had me come down to what they call the Big Ten, which are the 10 large Midwestern states. And they have their convention in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So this was like 3 years ago. So I went down and presented there to both the men and the ladies auxiliary. And at that particular convention, I was introduced to the Adjutant General of the National VFW, based out of Kansas City. I was then invited to speak at the National Convention in Reno, Nevada 2 years ago. And that was a really unique experience, because I met the commanders from all 50 states. I was on the same stage. The President of the United States was one of the speakers, a bunch of 4-star generals. And as I tell people, I was Mitt Romney's warm-up band, because he came on right after I got done speaking. So it was a cool event. It was really neat, but it really got the project out at a national level. So we've had the current national commander visit the cemetery about 2 months ago. We've had several of the ladies auxiliary American Legion presidents visit. And so they have supported it really, really well. And now, of course, I won't get into the whole fundraising aspect, that's not my job, but we've moved on to other venues now for different programs. But I want to go back to the educational end of it, because that's really where this project, in addition to honoring the men and women, is very important. Because if you look at the curriculum in today's schools, or just look at education in general, there's a really big part of our American history and how people have, fought to preserve our American history is sort of getting lost in the quagmire. So once the video project is finished with TPT, our hope is that it will be an hour-long special. They will show it at 5 times prime time. They will provide us with roughly about 3,000 DVDs that we can send out to the different schools. So for instance, if a school class, history class, would like to visit the site, they would have to call and set up an appointment ahead of time, because generally we know the burial schedule several days in advance. And so if there is a burial going on, this place, first off and foremost, is for the veterans and their families, so you cannot do a tour at that time. But in an off hour, or arrangements can be made, we can set aside some time depending on how things are going. And so what our hope would be is that the students would view this video, and they would see all the different symbolic elements and the different storylines that go into each painting, each branch, because each branch is its own culture. And that was one of the things that as I began researching this out, it took like 5 weeks just to get the composition of the Army organized, because part of that was trying to figure out the research. So again, falling back in education, it was a huge educational toy for me also. So what I have learned, and I'm continuing to learn as a result of this project and the people I have met, has really been phenomenal. And you can't put that into words. So they would view this, they would then get a worksheet, go out to the site, and it would all of a sudden become like a treasure hunt, where, come back and identify all these, and when you get back to class, we would review the worksheets and see what you've learned from this, and it gives them a greater appreciation of what is going on, what's going on, and what will happen. Again, also the families are something that, those that are left behind, there should be more of an awareness of that. And so if you look at the Navy painting, you'll notice in the far lower right-hand corner is a little girl who's looking out at you. She's hanging on to her father's shoulder, and so that depicts either the departing sailor, soldier, corpsman, whatever it might be, or the returning. And so it's those that are left behind. And once everything is said and done, and all 5 paintings are in the building, she is the only one that will be looking out at the audience. And so so that's the connecting point. And she's my little grandniece, and it was a real trip working with her. And there's just a funny sidebar story. My nephew had called me last year and said, Uncle Charles, could you come to Lindbergh School and do Share Day? I said, so what's Share Day? He said, well, Kylie's been telling everyone that you're her uncle and she's in this big painting and nobody believes first graders. I said, okay. So we had to set up this whole program. with the first graders. They had her in the front of the room and all that, so we had taken some photos and sent them over to the e-board so I wouldn't have to bring stuff with me. And as we were going through some of the things, I finally said, "Are there any questions?" She raised her hand and said, "Well, when are you going to show me?" So, you know, she's a trip. But at any rate, you know, that kind of in a nutshell talks about the project. I think in closing, for us for some questions, 4 years ago we had retired Admiral Henry McKinney as our guest speaker, who, as it turned out, became a very big confidant and helped me a lot on the Navy painting, as well as another dear friend, Ray Stump. But at that program, which we do every Sunday at Memorial Day in that afternoon, because Memorial Day Sunday, because on Memorial Day people then can go to other little cemeteries, he got up in front of roughly 1,500 people and talked about his experience. His last command was the entire Pacific Fleet of nuclear-powered submarines, and then from there he went on to head up the Naval Memorial Foundation Museum in Washington, D.C. So for 7 years he traveled the country looking at memorials, raising money. And he said without a doubt that we were taking what he considered to be the most unique approach he'd ever seen for a memorial, for a cemetery, and also in saying that said, this will not only be a valuable asset to central Minnesota, but to the country. And so to have someone who's traveled around like that, you know, go up front of that large of audience and make those comments, and he's like done other things for us to help us out. So we're very fortunate, and again, thank you for being here this evening. If you have any questions, like I said, I can go on about a whole slew of things, but we'll keep it at that. Okay.
Thank you.
You're released from class. No. Thanks for being here.